What if your dice could tell a story? Inspired by the worlds we create together at the table. Introducing Hero Forge Custom Dice. For the first time, your dice can hold the very stories they help tell. Now you can design and roll dice as personal and unique as your character. Using cutting-edge technology, we 3D print your character's iconic gear, familiars, and even your full character or bust right into the dice. Roll to attack with your flaming longsword. Take a swig of healing potion. Or let Winston the Warg here attempt a charisma check, which he's sure to pass. These aren't just dice, they're your dice. Choose from thousands of options to create the perfect story moment. Whether you're a wargamer or a warg rider, you can customize your dice to fit whatever your tabletop adventure may be. Frame it in your chosen dice. Personalize your numbers, and you're all set. Back us today and bring your stories to life with Hero Forge Custom Dice.
Hello everyone and welcome back to the Wolfpack. I hope you all enjoyed that commercial or Kickstarter trailer that I made for Hero Forge. I had an amazing opportunity to make a commercial for them, and their campaign is live right now, which you can check out in the description box below. But today I wanted to kind of break down the commercial, which I haven't done in a hot minute. It's been a while since I did a commercial breakdown, but I did want to talk about like 5 tips that you can take away from this commercial that I made. And even if you're not interested in filming content, just sit back, get some popcorn, get some, I don't know, what else am I eating over here? Hot Cheetos, chips, potato tacos, whatever you want, and relax while I break down some fun little shots that I made for that video. Okay, so the very first thing that I wanted to break down was the dice themselves have, let me go get some. So ultimately, these dice are very, very tricky things to film because, especially if you're filming like a D20, there are so many different sides that you have to account for in how light refracts through. And these dice are also super cool. Like aside from that, is because you have the actual figures or whatever you want to put in them in the middle. But ultimately, here's how dice are naturally. They just sit on your table, right? So the ultimate challenge here was not only figuring out how to film them in a way that really graces their beautiful diffractions and kind of like shows off a lot of their key characteristics, but to also make it look interesting for the entire length of the voiceover, because then you have to introduce a lot of variety in your shots, which we'll talk about in a second. So the first tip I want to break down for you is actually adding in height for your dice. And this one I talk about a lot for board game components, but this is very applicable to the dice themselves. So in this particular shot over here, which I will put up on screen, this is a very, very detailed layered shot. So let's talk about this. The first tip that I have for you is to add height to your dice. And one way to do that is by adding in a riser. So a riser, people use this all the time for like vending stalls. They use this for makeup. They use this for any kind of display. And they work perfectly for board game components and also really well to display, like you see here, miniatures and dice. So what I did was I actually put in the smallest dice and the smallest figurines or the smallest miniatures on the very bottom, right? Because then your attention is going to be all towards the center and the top of the frame. So when you look at the center, you see like these really big, gigantic miniatures, because you can tell by scale that, you know, the height is much different from the miniatures at the bottom. And also the dice too, like they have these big dice versus small dice, right? So easily you can tell by scale there. And you have this giant, you know, like center point focus with the dragon wyvern right up top. And then along with the wyvern, you have the dice in the middle. So ultimately here, what's happening in the scene is that you have 2 risers put right next to each other. And then you have the miniature for context, and then you have the dice right next to them. So even if the miniatures take up a big scale of this, the ultimate takeaway from here was that these miniatures are put inside of these dice. So if you look at all these dice shown here in this frame, they all are related to the miniature that they're standing next to. The druid has a druid bust. The mage has a mage bust. You also have all the little, D6s, D8s, D10s, all the other types of dice next to the miniature. And they can have like accessories like the hammer or any of those things that are related to the actual miniature. And then behind the miniature, you have all kinds of terrain actually from Dwarven Forge. You have the water terrain, you have a forest terrain, you have the volcanic terrain on the left, you have a kind of a rustic building village to the right. There are a lot of colors here, so for lighting, I only used one specific color. I think it was at a 3500 Kelvin wavelength. And lighting breakdown can be a whole nother video, but specifically what I want you to take away from this frame is you want to add height to your shot, because imagine if all of these were put on a table, then there's so much clutter and you don't know what to look at. But here, when you separate it by level, it looks a lot cleaner, a lot classier, and you can really tell like exactly what you're looking at. You're looking at a bunch of miniatures with their dice. Okay, that leads me to tip number 2, which is I kind of mentioned in tip number 1, which is give context to the dice that you're using. So even if your dice didn't have anything in the middle, even if they were just like a simple design or just a color, you want to give context on how you're using those dice, because we use dice for all kinds of things, right? All kinds of unique board games with different elemental uses. We have D&D, we have wargaming, we have dice just for collection. Whatever kind of dice that they're being used for, you want to show that kind of context. So in this case, I wanted to show like a customization character context for D&D. Like if you look at the paladin with the pink cape, you can see all of her types of dice right there, and like as a set. You have the shield, you have the bow and arrow, you have the sword, you have like her helmet. So when you add context, you give viewers not just a pretty image, but a relatability. And that's really important, and one thing that I think is missed a lot when you're filming footage for board games overall. Now, to also stay on this frame, as we look through it, what we're using here is actually a slider, because it slides from left and it speeds up to the right. All this was shot in 4K 24 frames per second to match like TV setting. So when you're filming dice, again, they are static on a table normally. Our goal is to make that look interesting. So one way to diversify that is by adding movement to your shot. In this case, I set all these dice on a table, and then on the Rascal's table, and then right next to it, it was a bunch of different platforms, like wooden blocks that I used to add in different types of height, depending on how tall the miniature was and how many dice are included with that particular set. So then I used the slider shot to just pan through from left to right for that particular shot. And then in what you'll see most frequently in this video is a turntable. That's a classic one, right? I'll link a turntable too if you want to see the one that I use. But the turntable shot is super important because then you get to see a lot of the different dimensions of the dice too, just circling in the center, along with some added accents, right? We have a bard here, and then we're adding like a purple light because a lot of her clothing leans towards like the purple lighting. We have a druid. We have a lot of like forest themed clothing here, of course. So then we add in a green light too. So the lighting that I used in the video overall was very specific and was very particular to the type of shot as well. So overall, reason number 3, add movement to your shot. You can do so by adding in a turntable, by using a slider. Either you want to move the dice, you can even move the dice with your hands like I did for one shot, or use camera movement to add in movement to the dice. Okay, tip number 4, by far the most missed reason why people aren't elevating their footage, what they film for board game content to the maximum, is that they're missing this very thing, and that is sound design. I can tell you right now, sound design is missing from so many different types of videos, and it's such a big part. Like, that's like making a peanut butter and jelly sandwich without the jelly. You need that other piece to put the whole sandwich together. What I'm filming here is slow motion, so you're not gonna get any kind of sound at all. Or if anything, if I do get sound, like I do now for the R5 Mark II, you're gonna hear a lot of muffled sound like it's gonna sound bad. It's not gonna sound cinematic at all. So the sound library that I use right now is from Artlist. I actually use a combination of Artlist, MusicBed, and Epidemic Sound, in case you're curious. But the sound design that I use from there is actually manipulated. That way it matches the movement of the dice. So you don't want to get dice rolling when they're not rolling. You don't want to get dice falling on wood when it's falling on a surface like this. So the type of sound that you get matters because it sells the effect a lot more. This one here is like casino dice being just kind of handled in your hand, right? And then I added in a couple of different layers because you see a ton of dice here. So I think from what I hear from the sound effect itself, it's like 3 dice. But then I layered it, that way it matches about 9 to 12 dice in this particular frame. And I did that for every single shot that has dice movement. Now, it's not to say to limit yourself to say that you only add in sound design when there is sound used, but you can also use sound in a more advanced way, which maybe like if I ever end up doing a course, I can show you how I use sound for like more advanced effects, like to sell a light moving across the table, right? That's not gonna make any sound, right? If you have a full-on light streak like this, go from the left to the right, there's no sound. But then when you add in a whoosh, whoosh, you sell that cinematic effect to your commercials. And the very last tip I wanted to mention today when filming dice is to ultimately add variety. Now that lends itself to, I think, tip number 2, but I want to expand on that because if you look through the entire commercial here, there is a lot of variety being used in how to showcase the dice. I'm adding height, I'm adding a turntable, I'm adding in a dice with a miniature for context, I'm adding in different wooden blocks. I'm also using not only a turntable, but like a spinning camera around one specific board. It's not just the turntable being used. I'm also building out all these different types of terrain from Dwarven Forge and putting the dice in that context to show people like, hey, we're playing D&D, we're having our characters here with an epic boss monster and flames over here. Dice are being used in this shot. So ultimately, when you are filming, even if it's not just dice, but any other product, miniatures, gold coins, any kind of components overall, you always want to add in variety in camera movement, in setting, and how those components are being handled to overlap with sound design. So all these tips can be used interchangeably, but overall, I hope you found them helpful in some way or another. Such a fun project to be working on and such a fun opportunity to be like filming all of this because it definitely leveled up my videography overall. It was a big challenge to film, but overall I had a ton of fun with it. Hero Forge, if you happen to be watching this, thank you so much for having me on this project. It was such a pleasure to work on, and I'm excited to be talking about these dice a lot more and showing like the expansion of the videography tricks and tips that I've learned. I really do want to be able to make a course, and let me know if this is something that you're interested in. I know I've asked a couple of times, but I think if I get enough interest, I might be like committing to one this year. I just think that when I do make a course, it would be something like this, like a very casual talking head shot, because it just is impractical for me to make it like super extreme quality to pay off for like the actual production of the videos. And then when I take a course, I'm there for the value. So I don't really care. Like it's nice that the visuals are cool and everything like masterclass, but ultimately I'd rather have value put in the course and just like tell me how to speed up and show me how to get from point A to point B as fast as possible. But that's just me. That's how I take classes in general. So yeah, anyways, just a little rant before I finish out the video. If you made it to the very end of the video, go ahead and comment roll for all the dice that we'll be rolling right after this for all the games and fun RPGs and everything that we're playing. I just rolled number 4 on this D20. Oh, how crazy would that have been if that was a 20 instead, but that was a 3. It's got lower for this one. But anyways, thanks so much for hanging out with me. I hope you found these tips helpful, and I hope you all enjoyed that intro commercial. So I'll see you all in the next one.